Funding for this program was provided in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
Wyoming PBS and Wyoming Public Media present Election 2020, the debate for U.S. House, live from the Fine Arts Auditorium at Eastern Wyoming College.
Good evening and welcome back to the beautiful campus of Eastern Wyoming College in Torrington, Wyoming for the Wyoming 2020 General Election U.S. House debates. We're in the Fine Arts Center here on the campus of Eastern Wyoming College, and I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. I want to note that tonight's debate is again being broadcast by Wyoming PBS and our network on the Wyoming Public Media Network and our social media platforms, and also on C-SPAN.
And I'm Bob Beck of Wyoming Public Radio. Craig and I will question the candidates this evening in what we hope will be a thoughtful and a civil exchange. A quick note, we're utilizing social distancing practices here, so there is no live audience for tonight's debates.
3 of the 4 ballot candidates for Wyoming's U.S. House seat are with us this evening, and with the assistance from the Wyoming League of Women Voters, who conducted a random draw for us, we've predetermined the order that the candidates will appear and take questions here this evening. All of the candidates have been briefed on the ground rules for tonight's debate, and I will note that Libertarian candidate Richard Brubaker was invited to participate in tonight's debate, but declined our invitation.
Now, in addition to questions from us, midway through this debate, we will again have a segment where the candidates, unscripted, will discuss issues amongst themselves. Now, it should be noted that the questions Craig and I will ask the candidates this evening have been drawn from pool questions submitted by Wyoming Public Media listeners and staff, Wyoming PBS viewers, and also developed by Craig and I. The candidates have not seen these questions.
We again want to get right to our debate. Each candidate is allowed an opening statement, and then questions will follow. If the candidates are ready, we're ready to begin. Mr. Haggit, by luck of the draw, you are first.
Thank you. Thanks to Wyoming PBS and Eastern Wyoming College for hosting this debate. I am the Constitution Party State Chairman and candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, the People's House. I think we are all in agreement that 2020 has not been kind to this country with the fires and COVID-19, etc. But for all the things we can worry about, let us not lose sight of the one thing we should hold near and dear: our liberties, which are the safeguard to our freedoms. The liberties I'm referring to are the principles of natural rights liberty reflected in the teachings of John Locke, whose writings influenced many of our founders. If history has taught us anything in this, it is in the wake of national traumas, liberties are frequently attacked, repressed, or done away with. We should not be choosing between liberty and safety. As Ben Franklin famously said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security. Finally, I offer a voice for the voter to choose someone who will work to rebalance the power of the 3 branches of government to their constitutional roles, especially the executive branch, and start the road to reducing our national debt, which is 107% of our GDP. This is likely to get worse under either Biden or Trump.
Thank you. Representative Cheney?
Thank you very much, and thank you to Wyoming PBS, and thank you also to Eastern Wyoming Community College. It's really an honor to be here this evening. Also with Ms. Greybull and Mr. Haggit, my 2 opponents. I am running for re-election to the House of Representatives to represent Wyoming so that I can continue fighting on behalf of our freedom, on behalf of Wyoming values, to ensure that we do uphold and defend the Constitution, our constitutional rights. We have seen this year the set of challenges and threats that we have, I think, very rarely faced, potentially an unprecedented set of challenges. And it is going to require continued focus every single day to ensure that we fight back against the very dangerous policies that the Democrats, particularly in the House, we've seen leadership now for 2 years under Speaker Pelosi, an embrace of socialism, an embrace of anti-Semitism, threatening our Second Amendment rights, threatening our First Amendment rights, really at all moments looking to impose partisan legislation, not working across the aisle to actually get things done, to provide the kind of relief that we need so we can defeat the pandemic, get our economy growing again. I'm tremendously honored to represent all the people of Wyoming in the House of Representatives, and I look forward to the chance this evening to talk about the issues we face and to earning your support for another term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull.
Good evening. My name is Lynette Greybull, and first I want to thank the organizers of this debate, Wyoming PBS, and the moderators. Also, I want to thank my opponents, Mr. Haggit and Representative Liz Cheney. I want to thank you so much for your attendance and presence here tonight. Again, I am Lynette Greybull. I live in the heart of Wyoming in the Wind River Reservation. And you know what? Quite simply, I want to represent the people. I come from the working class, and I represent the working class because I know what it is to live a life here in Wyoming, where most of Wyomingites are from the working class. And I know what struggle is. I know what hardship is. I know how hard it is to get that type of representation in Washington, D.C., because most of the representation in D.C. are millionaires, are from the 1%. It's important that we strengthen our constitutional rights and we strengthen democracy in our country because everybody deserves a voice. And I'm fighting for my seat at the table so that I can bring others to have a seat at the table. I think diversity and equality and justice for all, and to promote the general welfare for everyday people and people like myself from the working class and people who knows what community is. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We'll begin our question and portion of the debate. The first question for Mr. Haggit is from Bob Beck.
Mr. Haggit, rural mental health continues to decline. Wyoming has some of the highest rates of suicide in the country, and then deaths related to alcohol and drugs are high as well. Much of this, of course, is due to the lack of access to mental health clinics in rural areas and easy access, of course, to guns. So what plans do you have to help communities overwhelmed by deaths of despair?
The subject of suicide touches me personally. I lost someone near and dear to me to suicide due to mental illness, so I went through that. Wyoming's such a rural state, and it's important to have local. I mean, we have a state hospital in Evanston, and they run the whole gamut of different aspects of mental health, bringing in the criminal element into there and housing people that need constant 24-hour care to monitor their medications. But you need to have that outside in the rural areas too. Guns, that's not a part of this, but it's other than the fact that you probably need to keep guns away from
Thank you, Mr.
people
Haggit.
that might have a problem with
Representative Cheney.
Well, thank you very much. I think these are critical issues, and they're issues that we have seen take on enhanced importance, particularly as we've faced the threat of this pandemic and of the economic shutdown and some of the economic consequences that we faced. I think there are several things that are important. One is to work to help to empower our local organizations, our churches, our faith communities, the wonderful counseling centers that we have locally in communities around the state to make sure they have the resources that they need. We also need to ensure that we do more for telehealth. I think that both in terms of the physical exams and as well as in terms of mental health, I've introduced legislation that will help to ensure that we can continue some of the Medicare payments, for example, that have been allowed during COVID for people who want to use telehealth to consult with their therapists as well. But I think that kind of access is very important.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
In 2016, I delivered a congressional briefing on tribal suicide health crisis. Native Americans have the highest suicide rates in the country. This is not just a Wyoming thing, this is a national problem. My history in working with youth, I understand the dire need of having resources there to get the help that they need. I have talked to mothers, I have talked to grandmothers who have children and grandchildren who were on the verge of depression or in the process of going through depression and even talking about suicide. And the resources there were just not there. again, this goes back to representation. This goes back to the suicide rates usually come from disadvantaged communities, from a working class community. We need to provide the mental health resources that is needed for every community across the state and nation.
Thank you. Mr. Haggit, you have an additional 30 seconds if you would like.
Thank you. Yes, telemedicine is recent improvements have been great. Wyoming has adopted legislation to join the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. This compact makes it easier for out-of-state telehealth providers to practice in Wyoming. I don't believe there's a parity law passed in Wyoming yet. I don't know, but anyway, this is the state's issue, but one I support. Wyoming is listed as one of 20 states having limited coverage for telemedicine on the Visuel, I don't know if I pronounced that right, website. Due to Wyoming being such a rural state, this service should be encouraged and improved.
Thank you, Mr. Haggit. Representative Cheney, this question's for you. 32.6 million young adult Americans are now living at home. In July, that was 52% of young adults who resided with one or both of their parents, even before the pandemic. That number was 47% in February, according to Pew Research numbers. Does that concern you?
Well, I think it concerns me if we're facing a generation that is facing particular challenges now. I think it depends on how you define young people, but certainly during COVID, certainly as we've watched people who've graduated, people who are now entering the workforce, it's been much more difficult to be able to find jobs. I think that pre-COVID, we absolutely saw an expansion in job opportunities, an expansion in employment levels across the board for young people, for women, for minority communities. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that we can get back to that. We need to make sure we can defeat the pandemic and get our economy growing again. We know fundamentally that it's economic growth and opportunity. We've seen things like opportunity zones that this administration has put forward that really do help to encourage investment and expand opportunity across the board. We need our young people to have opportunity so that the economy can continue to grow. It's going to require defeating the virus and getting the economy going again.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
Yes, living here in Wyoming, of course, when you're in the, I'm in the nonprofit world and working with community building. I'm a community advocate. During COVID-19 and the spike of it, I delivered food boxes to those in need in Fremont County. And so my connection to the community, not just only in my community, but also statewide, the thing that I hear constantly is the lack of housing. For my community, we have 2 to 3 families in one household, but that's not only true for Wind River Reservation, that's also true for our rural communities across the state. This is a real issue, and this is a real issue that Wyoming faces. And so I know that for a fact by being connected with my own community and people across the state. But in the realms of job opportunity and economic structure, I know that we had about 600 to 800 people laid off from the coal industry last year. And most of them had to go out of state to find jobs. Our unemployment rate is at 11% right now, and it's rising nationwide, even pre-COVID.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit?
Repeat the question again.
Be happy to. Once I find it, here we go. 32.6 million young adults, Americans, are now living at home. In July, that was 52% of young adults resided with one or both of their parents. Even before the pandemic in February, that number was 47%, according to Pew Research numbers. And is that concerning to you?
Well, it's just an indication of where we're at with either homelessness is rising, and it's going to be it's already a major problem, and it's going to get worse if things don't change. It's very concerning that that they have to live back with the parents. They have to open things back up again, and when is the cure, going to come in? When is not the cure? When we get to the point where the virus is worse than a cure, and then you're going to have these problems, and that's just a minor symptom of what we got going on.
Representative Cheney, 30 more seconds if you would like.
Well, I think it's very important that we recognize, again, we've got to make sure that our young people have opportunities. We've got to make sure our young people, particularly here in Wyoming, have opportunities, and that people don't feel like they've got to go out of state. I think one of the things that has been so important about what the Trump administration has been able to do, for example, is ensure that we are helping to support our fossil fuel energy and industry, our ag industry, in ways that we certainly didn't see under the last administration. Those are the kinds of things, once we are able to defeat the virus, that will provide really important, good-paying jobs for young people so they stay here in Wyoming.
Thank you. Next question is for Ms. Greybull from Bob.
Ms. Greybull, the federal debt was already unacceptably high, and with COVID, it's certainly skyrocketed further. What's your plan for addressing it without hurting workers, the working poor, and the elderly?
That's a good question. In 2021, we are going to be in the midst of living through this pandemic, or we're going to be in the wake of working through the repercussions of this virus. It's important that we put human welfare first. I understand there's a national debt. I understand the concerns of that. Everybody in leadership and policy should always have that as a factor, especially when you're working on legislation and bills. It always should be at the back of your mind, how is this going to affect the national debt? I understand that portion of it. But I want to reflect a little bit backwards. In 2006, we faced a recession. Americans were losing jobs. The stock market was crashing. And millions of Americans were losing their homes. I worked on the Making Homes Affordable Act, where we helped over millions of Americans stay in their homes. So what I'm saying to this is that we have the ability to overcome and achieve if we put people first, and I believe we have the right hearts and minds of leadership to make sure we move forward in a way that we fly high in the wake of this pandemic.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit, your opportunity to respond to Mr. Beck's question.
The economy, are we talking about the
federal debt was high and
okay.
Yep.
Yeah. The federal debt, like I said earlier, is 100% of what we bring in. That's we're talking bankruptcy. We got to turn that around. We got to stop it now. And that means spending, if we're going to take care of people, which is great, we have the CARES Act, we need to make sure people aren't thrown out in the street. And hopefully that's going to continue until we can get our economy back. But we have to cut somewhere else. We can't keep increasing our debt, and otherwise there's just going to be a cliff. You're off, and you're not coming back from it. So we need to stop spending money somewhere so we can take care of the people.
Thank you. Representative Cheney.
Yeah, it's an existential threat, and I think that when you look at the extent to which, it'll be 100%, I think, in 2021, 107% in 2023, we absolutely have to get control of it. I think there are several things we need to do. First of all, recognize the threat posed by the fact that China holds significant share of our national debt, and we know now that China is responsible for causing this pandemic to spread around the world. It increases the danger in terms of the size of our federal debt. We also have a problem because if you look at how much of the budget the United States Congress actually gets to have a say on every year, it's under 30%. And so you've got a lot of programs, even before you talk about how important it is to save Social Security, to save Medicare, they're going to go broke if we don't save them. There are a lot of other programs that are also mandatory every year, about $1 trillion worth. I've co-sponsored legislation to move those programs back onto the discretionary side of the ledger so that we really can begin every year to get a hold of it and they don't just automatically roll over.
Ms. Greybull, 30 more seconds if you would like.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I do believe that, national debt is a concern. Again, I reference looking backwards because we were able to get over the recession several years ago. We were able to keep Americans in their homes. We were able to help American people move forward and still build the economic structure. I don't believe it's a landslide after we get out of the wake of this pandemic. I do believe we have the ability to move forward and persevere like we always have in our country. And so I do think that we do have to put the people first. And when we put the people first, we'll go ahead and build our economic structure moving forward in a bipartisan manner.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit, what has the pandemic taught you about America's healthcare system?
The healthcare system, I'm working the mines in Southwest Wyoming, and we're blessed there. We have healthcare, we have insurance, but healthcare is important, but people have a role in their own healthcare, and I would like to see people be educated, and right now the doctors' hands are tied with whatever regulations that they have to follow, or they could lose their license. I would like to see natural homeopathic remedies that are proven and safe integrated into our healthcare system, so that we have the best of both worlds, and we can grow from there and keep from getting sick in the first place.
Representative Cheney?
So many things. I think, first of all, what heroes our first responders are, what heroes our healthcare workers are, who day in and day out are treating patients with COVID, putting themselves at risk, putting their lives on the line for all of us. We've made tremendous strides in terms of knowing how to treat COVID. We made tremendous strides in the United States through things like Operation Warp Speed and beginning to make progress towards a vaccine, towards therapeutics. I think that the United States innovation in healthcare is not matched anywhere else around the world, but we've got to make sure that people have access to it, and you should be able to get those treatments and have access to those treatments no matter the challenges that you're facing from an economic consequence or circumstance, no matter where you live. I think that's crucially important. But I think the number one thing is just the tremendous debt of gratitude we owe to our healthcare professionals.
Ms. Greybull?
For my community, healthcare is not equitable. Healthcare is not easily accessed. During the peak of COVID, we had tribal members that went into the nearby town to seek healthcare help through the local emergency there, and they were turned away. These were people who were facing dire need, and some of them have passed away. Our community have faced a high death rate, 50% compared to the Wyoming's death rate for COVID. Healthcare is not equitable, and this is true for disadvantaged communities across the nation. If you as a leader do not understand that aspect of it, coming from majority of hardworking middle-class people, you're doing a disservice, because leadership should represent every single person that needs the help.
Thank you. Mr. Haggit, additional time?
I'm good.
Thank you. Next question for Representative Cheney from Bob.
Representative Cheney, I was watching a documentary on 1968 and watching some of the issues facing the country at that time, and I feel like we're reliving that, and we're enjoying a pandemic and several things along with that this year. But, the race issues seem to be as bad as they've been in some time. How seriously are you taking all of this, and what do we need to do as a country to resolve some of these things?
Well, I think that the riots that we've seen across the country and the violence that we've seen in too many instances overtook peaceful protests. I think we need to make sure we defend people's right to peaceful protests, certainly, but I think it's very important that we recognize that violent rioting is not peaceful protest. I think that when you look at the challenges that we're facing as a nation, issues around race are issues that have been challenges for us for some time. I think one of the most important things we can do is get back to the values in our founding documents. I think that when you look at what our founding fathers laid out in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, we have not attained those goals. We certainly are not perfect under any circumstances. We have work to do, but the best way to get to the point where we can guarantee freedom and equality and justice for everyone is to go back to those values on which this country was founded. We need to teach our kids those values. Too often our kids are not learning that in school today, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
I believe, and I've worked in social justice for quite some years, and I do believe that every person in this country should be treated fairly, as equal, depending on your race, gender, or any other factor, or title or status. Unfortunately, I feel like we're living in this social divide because we have leaders who are feeding not only the political divide, but also the social divide on a we versus them, us against them. And quite frankly, my past history and experiences is to try to bring people together because I like to be known as a peacemaker. I like to be known as a bridge maker. This is what I do. I believe in bipartisanship efforts and bringing it together because that's when you put people first, and policy should always lead back to people. So in the topic of equality, I think so much work needs to be done. I believe we should be more concerned about why are they peaceful protests, why are they rioting, why are they crying, why? So we can begin to understand and that leaders can begin to offer solutions to their heartaches.
Thank you. Mr. Haggit?
There's pretty much equal representation as far as government goes. And if you look at the percentage of population of minorities in the government, they're pretty much represented that same percentage in government. But elsewhere, there's pockets of that, but it starts in the home, teaching that everyone is equal, and if you treat each other how you want to be treated, that's the golden rule.
Thank you. 30 more seconds, Representative Cheney.
Well, I would also just like to add how important it is. You know, we've seen a huge movement on the left to defund the police in the wake of the riots that we've seen around the country. And I think that is absolutely irresponsible. I think it's indefensible. I think when you see businesses destroyed, livelihoods absolutely destroyed by rioting, we need to make sure that we're supporting law enforcement, that we're helping these police departments, that we're supporting good cops. Nobody wants to get rid of bad cops more than good cops do. And I think the notion that somehow you defund the police in response is just flat wrong.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull, this question is for you. Do you believe some tech companies have too much power or influence in the marketplace? And if so, what should the government's role be in addressing that?
I think that in corporations in regards to tech, there should be some limitations and some standard and some structure there to help structure it in a fair manner. And I think that goes for anything. I think that goes in regards to multinational corporations versus small businesses. I'm a big advocate for mom and pops and small businesses because this is what makes up Wyoming. If we go to every town across this state, you will see small businesses that's been passed down from generation to generation. And quite frankly, in the midst of COVID, I don't think a lot has been said for them. I don't think a lot has been done for them. And that impacts Wyoming because we are made up of small businesses that set up the economic structure. So again, I think that fairness, structure, equitable in small businesses and multinational corporations is the way to go when we're facing issues where someone might have a leg up versus somebody who doesn't.
Mr. Haggit?
Yeah, big tech, especially in the realm of our social media, Google, Facebook, Instagram, and all those are owned by a lot of the same people. And not too long ago, one of the tech guys out of Google went out and left the company. He was discussing what he was seeing. He was saying back in the 2016 election that due to algorithms in their social media and different things, they swung almost 2.5 million votes to Hillary Clinton. And we need to be, and he says in this election, you could probably factor it 3 times that. And we need to be aware of that and watch it. And they are really out to stifle free speech, and freedoms, as you could tell by my own statement, is very, very important to the Constitution Party and to myself, and we need to watch out for that and guard against them being able to sway things.
Thank you. Representative Cheney?
I do think it's a concern. I think when you look at companies like Twitter and Facebook, you see a significant increase in their power, their ability to control information, and it's not being exercised in a nonpartisan way. Too often conservative viewpoints are targeted. The other challenge we have is data, our personal data that those companies control. And I think it's really important for us to come up with a legislative structure where individuals, you're allowed to own your own data. And if you decide that you don't want your data on some platform, if you decide that you're going to change platforms, you take your data with you. But we don't have a situation today where you know exactly what those companies are doing with all of our data. And I go back again to China and to the extent to which we've watched the Chinese Communist Party infiltrate our systems, steal our data, and look to have an even broader surveillance system across the world, frankly, that resembles what they have today in China.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
Yeah, in regards to social media and data, that's always been a concern for me. I've worked in the realm of protection of children and an advocate for crimes against children, and social media has always played a role in that, unfortunately, especially when we talk about child sex trafficking. A lot of families that I've worked with in the past in regards to that issue has always stemmed from social media. So I think there's a lot more ethical efforts we can do to make the tech company and social media platforms a little bit more a protection of our children and ethical and have values that shame the same values of mothers and families. And I think that's important.
Thank you. The final question in this part of the debate for Mr. Haggit from Bob.
Mr. Haggit, as Ms. Greybull touched on, the Wind River Reservation has been hit especially hard by the pandemic, largely because of more than a century of poor healthcare access, a massive housing shortage, and forces extended families to share crowded homes. Quality healthcare and housing are among the services promised to tribes in exchange for the land that now makes up the state of Wyoming. So how would you plan to ensure that the U.S. upholds its treaty and trust responsibilities to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes?
It's been a long, long history. Wyoming has a lot of history with the tribes and stuff, and there's recently was a re-signing of the treaty a few years ago in Fort Bridger, where I live, and it was real interesting to be a part of that. But they been treated unfairly since the get-go, and whatever, I don't know what could be done specifically. I'm not nearly as involved in it as I could be, I guess, but it's not been a focus of mine. But I think it needs to be addressed, and but I don't know. I don't know what the answer would be to that.
Thank you. Representative Cheney?
I think it is crucially important for the United States to uphold our treaty obligations. We have worked particularly with respect to COVID and providing relief with the leadership of both tribes and have been able to provide several millions of dollars in relief to the reservation, to each of the tribes, as they're dealing with the challenge that Lynette mentioned in terms of multi-generations living in the same homes, the challenge that people are facing with trying to quarantine, trying to address the issue. All of the economic challenges we're seeing on the reservation have certainly been exacerbated. I think we need to make sure that we're providing more opportunity. I think we need to make sure we're doing more to help with the Indian Health Service. We need to make sure that we're doing more to help with education. I think there's been tremendous work done also at Laramie, at the university, to help encourage kids from the reservation to come to the university, to feel welcome there, to feel part of that community. And I think that all of those things are important, and we need to continue to do all of those.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
From the beginning of time, when us as Indigenous people had to face colonization and being merged with the European culture, we had always had to fight to get our voices heard. And here in 2020, as an Indigenous person, I can say that it is still true today. A lot of our issues, especially when it comes to policy, it's on the back burner. Our issues get pushed aside more often than anything else in folks in Washington, D.C. And you know what? I share this every single time I speak because I think it's important, but I'm also trying to compel compassion for tribes. I stand before you as a full-blooded Native American woman, and the statistics that hang over my head is that I am the most stalked, raped, murdered, and sexually assaulted than any other race in this country. There's a lot of things that can help support us. VAWA Act is one of them. We also have the lowest life expectancy due to health disparities. We also have the least amount of resources when it comes to even police departments and health services and housing. These are issues that I think all leaders should be concerned of.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit, 30 seconds additional if you'd like.
Yes. she's right. There's lots that can be done, and I'm a big states' rights guy, but I think in this case, the federal government has a play in it because that's started it, the whole thing, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. And I think there's some work that could be done, and they could get together and figure out something that would be beneficial.
Thank you very much, candidates. We're going to take a break from the question and response part of the debate and allow you to visit amongst yourselves for the next few minutes. Our timer has been instructed to give you 45 seconds once you start to speak uninterrupted. You can talk about anything you would like, perhaps something that's been covered earlier in the debate, other topics you want to make sure you have a chance to visit with your opponents about, or even question them if you would like. The only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw randomly from my hat here to see who speaks first. Bob and I will then sit back and you'll be on your own. So I chose Ms. Greybull. You have 45 seconds uninterrupted. And then candidates, the only thing that we'll do is maybe play traffic cop if you want to speak together. But other than that, this time is now all yours.
Last year, I did a congressional testimony on the protection of the Tribal Heritage and Grizzly Bear Act. Me and my opponent, Liz Cheney, was on opposite sides of that. But this was something very important for Indigenous people. It's the longest act we have in Washington, D.C. that represent policy for Indigenous people. My question is, for my opponent, Representative Cheney, you made a statement after the tribes won that case. And that statement was that we were ruining your Western way of life. My question is, are Native Americans included in the Western way of life?
Well, thank you for the question. My comment about that was the extent to which it was not that the tribes are ruining our Western way of life. It was that what we see happening from Washington, D.C. too often involves a massive expansion of the federal government's role and responsibility, including moving allocations of land out of multiple use, creating wilderness areas, creating monuments without talking to the people that live there, without talking to the people who may graze on those lands, for example. And one of the things that I've fought very hard for the entire time that I've been in Congress has been to help to restore and return local control and local decision-making and local input. One of the biggest challenges we faced during the Obama administration, for example, was an effort to have international NGOs have a say in how our land resources, how our mineral resources are allocated. And I think too often decisions from Washington do not actually understand and recognize the needs of the people who live and require and work on the resources in the land.
Yeah, I think in regards to the Grizzly Bear Protection Act, I think both Republicans and Democrats in Wyoming, they value not only the protection of the grizzly bears, of course, in the surrounding states, especially in Montana and the Dakotas, but also in regards to our public lands. Public lands is very important to me. It's something that I advocate. I'm an advocate for the Red Desert here in Wyoming. And I, quite honestly, I don't want to see 150 leases come across our public lands and take away the hiking and the biking and the great outdoors, because this is an asset for us for here in Wyoming. We value that, even in the winter. We go out and fish and ice fish in the winter, and us as Wyomingites, we do a good job of bringing out the outdoors and enjoying it and bringing our families. It's what we do. So in regards to the Grizzly Bear Protection Act, and in regards to the public lands and keeping public lands in public hands, how do you feel about having those industries impede on what we value and enjoy so much here in Wyoming?
Well, listen, I think that it's very important for us to make sure that we have lands available for recreation. I think that it's important that we follow the law, and Congress has passed legislation that requires, for example, that the BLM and the Forest Service, that lands be managed for multiple use. Some lands are set aside as wilderness, others are set aside as recreation areas. I don't think we ought to ever be in a position where federal agencies are stepping in and interpreting what Congress has done in a way that's counter to what Congress has done. And in addition to the unbelievable and unparalleled recreation opportunities we have in Wyoming, We have, people who make their living, who depend upon being able to graze on federal lands. And too often we see situations like we've had, for example, in our grasslands, where bureaucrats in Washington make decisions that make it impossible for our ranchers to be able to ranch, where the grasslands are devastated. What we're seeing right now with the forest fires, absolute mismanagement from Washington, D.C. And I think that my responsibility as a representative of the people of Wyoming is to make sure that that kind of mismanagement doesn't go on, that the people who actually depend upon the lands have the right to have a say about
Mr.
those
Haggit,
lands.
would you like to chime in?
Well, I have a question. You meant, not tonight, you didn't mention it, but I don't know if it was, I've seen it. You mentioned you wanted to create a public transportation system in Wyoming, correct? Okay. What would that look like, and how would it be funded?
My community has a disadvantage because we don't have public transportation. And I know that not be the same in other communities in regards to Jackson or some other places. But I've talked to a lot of people, and I have a lot of friends in other communities, and they're rural, they're just as small, and transportation is a huge issue there, especially when we talk about people who don't have transportation, people who don't have cars, people who have to share cars because there's more than one family in one house. And so my idea of a transportation system will not only create jobs, but it would also come into our economics here in the state of Wyoming, but also take care of those who are in need, and those are people without transportation.
So you're talking like buses or
shuttle buses?
Shuttle buses?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We do have one shuttle bus here on the Wind River Reservation, but due to funding, they're only able to do morning and one morning and one afternoon shift to get rides from the nearby towns. And most of them benefit that are non-natives. It's the teachers, it's those who work in our tribal offices. They ride the shuttle in and go to work and then go home. So it's not just a benefit for Native Americans or disadvantaged people. It's a benefit for everybody. But not only that, it will build to the economic structure. And really quickly, I'll make this really quick. I do want to say in regards to our animals that we treasure here in the state of Wyoming, we all love our elk, moose, and deer, and antelope, and yes, even the grizzly bears. If we protect our animals, it's part of our tourism. Wyoming has a $1.9 billion tourism revenue, and so I think it's important that we continue to protect our animals and protect our public lands because that's what we're known for.
Candidates, we have a few more minutes of this. If you would like to continue on, or we can resume question and answers.
I'd like to ask Mr. Haggit to talk a little bit about the Constitution and some of the things you mentioned in your opening statement. I think it's very, very important that we do everything we can to make sure that we're abiding by the Constitution, to make sure that the separation of powers is respected. And I'd be interested to hear more about your thoughts on some of the things we could do to help to do a better job at that.
Sure, thank you. Article 2 of the Constitution provides for the powers of the executive branch, and that, and it's very clear in the Constitution. The executive branch has few and well-defined, and then everything else is reserved to the states and the people. But unfortunately, each successive president has built upon the other's overreach due to executive actions. And each one builds on it. They say, okay, there's a tool I can put in my little tool belt, and then pretty soon it's like there's no stop to it. Seems like, and it's misused and overused, and need to put a clamp on that. I think.
40-second segment if someone would like to take advantage of it.
In 2017, I testified here in Cheyenne, I lobbied against a Critical Infrastructure Act, and we're talking about the Constitution here. I do believe that we should protect our constitutional rights to freedom of speech. I don't believe that anyone, whether you're a government or a state level, should have the right to take away the speech of citizens. This is how we're able to voice our opinions. This is the way we are able to stand up for what we believe in. And I don't support bills both on a state or national or federal level that silence the voice of the American people.
Thank you very much, candidates. I thought that was a thoughtful and enjoyable discussion. We're going to resume our questions now. Representative Cheney, this question is for you. Your fellow Wyomingites understand that we as a state and a people face historic and daunting challenges. We know there is no ouchless, painless magic bullet to make things right, so tell us here tonight, what sacrifices are you calling upon your fellow Wyomingites to make for the common good?
Well, look, I think that people all across the state have sacrificed because of COVID, certainly. I mean, I think you can't talk about that issue and that question without dealing with the pandemic. And whether we're talking about small businesses that have not been able to stay open, whether we're talking about people who have become sick, people who've died because of COVID, I think we've asked a tremendous amount of the people of this state, and I think that they've delivered and they've produced, and we are facing challenging times. I mean, you saw yesterday the governor had a press conference and talked about the spike that we're seeing in the cases of COVID and how important it is for us to be responsible as we go about our business and do everything we can to defeat that. But I think this year of 2020 has been one that has certainly been characterized by challenges and threats, in particular with the pandemic and the economic consequences of that, that the people of Wyoming have really, they have sacrificed and they are standing up, and I know we're going to get through it and come out with a stronger economy and certainly a stronger sense of community in a lot of ways because we're facing the challenge together.
Thank you. Ms. Greybull?
Yeah, again, I had mentioned before that, when COVID hit us here hard in the state of Wyoming, I organized, not only, this was not a one-man band show, I organized with community advocates across the state, from Jackson all the way down to Cheyenne, to get the needs of food boxes and other supplies. Toilet paper was a big one, along with cleaning supplies and Lysol spray. You know what? It takes a community and it takes people to work towards community well-being. That's something that I've dedicated my life to. And so, I just try to fill in the gaps where there is a need. If I'm able to build that capacity to ensure and help people in need, or just elevate the voices of people whose voices are not heard, this is what I do. But I also believe in coming together. I am also a bridge maker, and I also have experience working bipartisanship, with the other side. I do not condone the we versus them, and you guys are wrong and we're right. That doesn't help anybody, and I don't want my kids to grow up in this political environment where we're at each other's throat. I don't think that is conducive on promoting peace.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit?
Thank you. I'm a volunteer with the United Way, and I sit on the Southwest Wyoming's UN Advisory Board, and part of our job is to, for these organizations they're asking for grant money to help their cause, and a lot of it is either disadvantaged children or women fleeing abusive husbands, the safe house, and you see and hear their story. They come in there, and people have suffered so much, and this was before COVID, and now it's off the charts, and it's going to get. There's look at food banks. There's lines around the block, and there's a. My time's up, but there's a big, huge, and there's no more room for suffering at the local level, and we need to do something to help these people.
Thank you. Representative Cheney, you have 30 additional seconds if you'd like.
Well, I'm proud that through the CARES Act legislation, we've been able to provide $2.8 billion to Wyoming, both to our state and local governments, to small businesses, to our hospitals, to make sure that we're providing all the resources possible to get through this pandemic. But ultimately, we've got to get the economy growing again. And I think that really will help us make sure that we're able to take care of the communities at risk and make sure that we are working together as communities across party lines in order to solve these challenges.
Thank you. Bob, for Ms. Greybull.
Ms. Greybull, I mentioned in the first debate that I may come with a bit of a cough because I am in a forest fire zone these days in Laramie. And one of the things we've heard is that the forest fire crews are finding it difficult to get resources given just how much most of the country, or at least the West, is on fire. The Mullen Fire, for example, grew tremendously as firefighters really only trickled in, and they say they only had enough resources to really play defense for a couple of weeks, and then The problem of strained resources is going to be really probably an annual problem. So would you support some kind of a federal New Deal-ish work program to give people jobs in firefighting?
Yeah, absolutely. I know it was mentioned earlier, but I do believe our firefighters are part of our first responders. And we should do all we can on all levels to ensure that they are supported, that they have the salary they need and the resources they need. I understand what it is to have the lack of resources. I live in a disadvantaged community most of all of my life where we've seen lack of resources. But living here on the western side of our country, we have to get the supplies and resources needed to our first responders and fire department, our National Forest Services. Those things are important to ensure the safety for the community and the state and also the country. We don't ever want to be in this situation where we're having to battle the smoke and the things that we're facing. I have asthma, so my asthma's been really hard to manage these days. But yes, I do think a federal policy can do a better job on making sure that our first responders are supplied with what they need.
Thank you. Mr. Haggit?
It's, when I hear New Deal, I'm thinking way back when during the Depression, when they were putting people to work building bridges, and I assume that's what you mean. Okay, so when these fires, one of the worst states with the fire is right now is California, and they have, the prison system there has a firefighting crew. And could you imagine being in prison? You would think any chance to get out of prison to go do something would be, and these are people that really care about doing their job. They wouldn't let them out because they were afraid they would bring COVID back to this prison. So there was a resource right there that they couldn't use, which was, when I heard that, I was like, really? So, but there's, I think there's room for creating something like what you mentioned, a New Deal. We're putting people to work to go and clear some of this underbrush and to help, and we need to open the logging back up, take some of this beetle kill out, and to manage our forests a little better.
Thank you. Representative Cheney.
I think that the real cause of the fires that we're seeing, the Mullen Fire and the fires that we're seeing across the West, is absolutely failed federal forest management policy. And when you look at things like the roadless rule that was put in place back in the Clinton administration, when you look at the extent that we cannot get in and clear out the beetle kill, when you look at the extent that we've had mills that have gone out of business because our timber sales just haven't been there, those are the things that we've got to do to get these forests back healthy again. We signed a stewardship agreement, the first of its kind in Wyoming. Governor Gordon and Senator Enzi and I did with Secretary Perdue about a month ago. We've also got to make sure that we're doing everything possible to increase timber sales, and Secretary Perdue has put in place additional amounts of timber that we can go in and clear out of the federal forests. But it's a huge job, but at the end of the day, it goes back to a federal government imposing policies and decisions about management that are killing the forests and devastating people, devastating livelihoods. We've lost property, people are losing their homes. And it doesn't have to happen, and it shouldn't be happening.
Ms. Greybull, additional time if you'd like.
I think it goes down to science. We face here, of course, what was mentioned already was the beetle kill. I have family who work in conservation here in the state of Wyoming. They clear out the trails and the roads up in our mountains and also in the Teton Mountains. But he's only able to work a few months a year because of the funding is just not there. And so the funding definitely has to be increased, especially in terms of how we manage our forests, make sure that they're in dangers of starting fires. And that's not just for Wyoming, that's just for the whole western side of America.
Thank you very much, candidates. And that concludes the question and answer part of the debate. We'll now progress to closing statements. We'll go in reverse order of how we conducted opening statements. These are a minute long. Ms. Greybull, you're first.
You know what, I just want to take this opportunity to just thank the citizens of Wyoming. Ever since I chose to run this campaign, I have been contacted by people from around the state. I've read every email. I have read every message that was sent to our social media campaign accounts. I have read every message and letter that has come across my way. Quite frankly, I am very humbled. I have a huge sense of gratitude to even have the opportunity, a person like me, to even stand on this stage and have the opportunity to speak on the issues that I know not only as my community are facing, but also other people across the state. I have a history in leadership. I hope that you have seen that as we went through this debate. I'm not new to federal and state legislation, both on the federal, state, and tribal level. And I also have a bipartisanship background as well. I like to be a peacemaker. I believe that leadership should promote peace and togetherness because this is what our children deserve.
Thank you very much, Representative Cheney.
Thank you very much. I want to thank my opponents for their willingness to put their names on the ballot, to be here to participate in this process. We live in the greatest state and the greatest country in the world, and we face huge challenges, but they are challenges that we will overcome. We can overcome them together. We can overcome them by defending our Constitution, defending our freedom, defending our values, and by always remembering, too, in Wyoming, we stand for the flag. And in Wyoming, we never forget that it is the men and women who have put on the uniform of this nation who have defended our freedoms for all of us, who continue to do so today. And we have an obligation to live lives worthy of that sacrifice, to make sure we're doing everything possible to fight for continued success, continued freedom. I'm honored to represent Wyoming in the U.S. House of Representatives. I ask for your vote for another term, and I would just like to say God bless Wyoming and God bless the United States of America.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haggit, you have the last word.
Thank you. I've lived in Wyoming since 1976. I'm involved in United Way as a fundraiser and sit on the United Way of Southwest Wyoming's UN Advisory Board, as mentioned earlier. I love our wide open spaces and our respect for individual freedoms. One of those freedoms is the freedom of speech, and the first test of that freedom was in 1798, and on it goes to this day. Private property rights are so essential to our freedom, and our founding fathers made that very clear. Unconstitutional laws have brought us to the cliff's edge. If elected, I promise to be a tireless defender and promoter for Wyoming, for America, its people, and its future. The government's role is to secure our God-given right to life and liberty, and it is the individual's right and duty to protect those rights by electing those who will observe and be guided by the Constitution of this state and this nation. It would be an honor to serve as Wyoming's lone delegate to the House of Representatives in Washington, and I would appreciate your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haggit. And candidates, thank you very much for participating in this debate. Our sincere thanks to our timer, Raiden Alonzo, for serving as our timekeeper tonight, and to Bob Beck. Bob's the voice of news for us in Wyoming, has been for a long time. Thank you for participating on the panel, Bob. Absentee voting is underway in Wyoming, and if you are not voting via absentee ballot, we certainly encourage you to go vote in the general election on Tuesday, November 3rd. We want to thank those of you who are watching tonight, either on Wyoming PBS, listening on Wyoming Public Media, or watching us on C-SPAN.
Thanks also to Eastern Wyoming College for having us this evening, and a reminder, you can see this debate again, and we can all critique our performance online at Wyoming PBS's YouTube page, and we also encourage you to stay tuned for our next, our next debate, and you see I grabbed the wrong dang script, so thank you for having me, and have a tremendous evening.